Hello, listener, and welcome to this preview of our latest Patreon-exclusive episode. To continue the conversation and listen to the full episode, head over to the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. The link is in the show notes. Hello, patrons, and welcome to this patron-exclusive episode of Beyond the Screenplay. Today we are talking about Little Miss Sunshine, written by Michael Arndt, directed by Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Harris. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, of course, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
Okay, so this movie won our Little Movies That Could vote, which was Garden State versus My Big Fat Greek Wedding versus Napoleon Dynamite versus Donnie Darko versus Little Miss Sunshine. Little Miss Sunshine won out, and I'll be happy to report that our new ranked voting system that we use dramatically affected the outcome, because Garden State lost the first round, and then My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and then Napoleon Dynamite, and all that time, Donnie Darko, if we'd done it normally, would have been the winner. But after eliminating those and transferring those votes, Little Miss Sunshine came out on top.
So you're saying Donnie Darko won the popular vote, but then it didn't get elected? Like, you're cool with that?
That's fine.
Yeah.
I am, yeah. Everyone else can go cry over their cellar doors and be fine with it. So Little Miss Sunshine, I have not seen, I don't know if I saw it in theaters, but I saw it around the time of release. And honestly, when I hear Little Miss Sunshine, I think of what everyone thinks of, which is the last line of Jay-Z's opening verse in Umbrella by Rihanna. Rain Man is back with Little Miss Sunshine. Rihanna, where you at? But
You had my heart, never been worlds apart. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But it's also a movie from 2004, and that's where that reference comes from. 2006, excuse me. I remember this movie, the kind of buzz around it, and just like, wow, it's really good. It's this indie movie. It was in this era of indie movies that we'll talk about. And I didn't remember very many of the details, but I remembered liking it. Watching it again, I realized that I really only remembered like parts of the first half of the movie, and significant beats like the grandfather dying happened at entirely different parts of the movie than I remembered, or Paul Dano speaking for the first time. Yeah. I love Paul Dano in this. This was like my introduction to Paul Dano too, right? It was
like, a lot of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome to the world, Paul Dano. But I was pretty sure that moment where he realizes he's colorblind was the midpoint, and that the grandfather dying was the crisis. But it's totally the backwards.
Because that's when those things happen in movies, and it's fun when they don't.
Yeah. So watching this was really interesting because I still liked it and was still moved by it. I think maybe in ways that I wasn't even when I saw it the first time, but was also stranger than I remembered, and made me realize how strange of a period this was for film. And then after this, I watched like the first 10 minutes of Garden State, and we don't need to talk about that. And I'm just never going to watch that movie again. And I think that's probably the best for everyone. But all of that was reinforcing what a weird time in movies this was. But good movie. Michael Arndt obviously went on to write some other good movies that made people emotional and almost write Star Wars movies. But yeah, I think this is a really interesting movie to study. And so I'm curious to hear from you guys what your relationship to this movie is. Trisha, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm sure I saw this. It was nominated for Best Picture that year, so I would have watched it as part of my watch all the Best Picture nominees forever. It's quirky. It's really funny. It is really entertaining. It actually has great momentum to it. It's a classic road trip movie, relatively simple premise and construction, and a true ensemble cast. And as many critics at the time were basically praising it of just being like, this is what an ensemble piece should be. You have all of these strong character actors really kind of pushing themselves and doing interesting performances in a relatively, simplistic movie. That's just kind of about a family dynamic and like sort of this overall big theme that people in the family are kind of wrestling with. And it has a killer ending, which I want to talk about too. Like, I really love the ending. I think it kind of makes the whole movie and kind of ties it all together and puts a hair bow on it, maybe. It's
sash.
great. Like, yeah, there you go. A sash, if you will. Tiara. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. It is darker than I remember. I think I remember it. Like, I remember the grandfather dying. And I'm like, well, that's kind of a dark turn. But it's like, and I was like, I think he's like smoking weed the whole time. He's like snorting heroin. Like
Right.
the whole time. You know, and when Alan Arkin's character is being terrible, he's being well and truly really terrible in the movie. And there's a lot of kind of real pain on the surface for some of the characters. And yeah, there's a lot more sort of in it than I remembered of the drama part of it, instead of just the comedic, like, oh, they all got to push the bus. So I really enjoyed watching it this time around. And yeah, I can't wait to get into some of the themes and kind of how it all fits together.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, I saw this once, I think, in theaters when it first came out. And yeah, we must have been in college at that point. Yeah, that was like mid-college years. And yeah, it was, I remember, liking it fine, but maybe kind of being a little bit annoyed by the period we were in movies at that moment, as evidenced by our vote, and kind of resisting it in some ways, and just being like, okay, yeah, this is going to get nominated for an Oscar. It's like, had Juno come out yet?
Oh,
Juno was next year.
Juno was next. Yeah. It was like in that lineage. And I was like, I was just starting to be like, okay, I see you, Fox Searchlight, what you're doing again. And like, it's going to be indie. It's going to be quirky. It's going to be like dysfunctional people being dysfunctional, but like funny. And I think, yeah, I have this like hazy memory of like, oh, that was good and fine, but like, I never have to see it again, whatever. Watching it this week, I really liked it, and it was a lot better than I remembered. And I think maybe at that age I hadn't appreciated just what it's like to be an adult and be middle-aged and just have adult problems and adults, existential crises. And I think it really, all the characters really clicked for me in a way that they did not on that first viewing, where I was really enjoying watching the performances and watching all the nuances and the details of the characters, especially in the kind of opening scenes. I thought the movie was so good at establishing each of them so distinctly, so quickly.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed watching it. And I think the part of the movie that kind of bumped for me the first time and still was a little weird for me this time, and we should talk about it because Trisha, you mentioned the ending as really working for you. I think something about the ending that was odd for me both times watching it is just how much it then kind of like dives into the world of like the child beauty pageant, which is like not a world the rest of the movie is really exploring, right? Or like to me, it's not really like the primary like thrust of the film up to that point. It's like, it's their goal. It's where they're going. But we spend enough time there and kind of like savor in the details enough that it feels oddly unbalanced. I understand why you want to soak in those details because it's so wacky and weird and wild. But yeah, I'm curious to talk about that third act because it does feel in a strange way like the movie becomes a different movie for that part. Just we're on this road trip. It's not really about beauty pageants. It's not really about that. And then it's kind of about that for a minute before it goes back to being about the family with the coming together to kind of rescue her. So anyway, those are all my thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we should definitely, again, that was sort of what was weird about all of it. As I remember, there was a beauty pageant performance of some kind, but the details of it, and like you're saying, that it's the whole third act essentially, like was the structure of this movie was different than I remembered, and it's interesting. So we should definitely dive into that. But first, Brian, what are your thoughts?
This was also a movie that I saw back roughly around when it came out, and it's interesting. We've hit a few movies in this podcast where I saw them in like the mid-aughts and loved them, bought them on DVD and was like, yeah, that movie's great. And then literally didn't watch them again until we went to podcast about it. So yeah, it was really great revisiting it. I also think it's just really holds up. It's really solid and really kind of got me emotionally. Obviously, it's not a surprise that I'm going to like a movie where the theme is, don't listen to people and be your weird self. But yeah, unlike Alex, I was really into the sort of indie kind of art film era of this decade. You know, we've talked about how the 90s were this interesting kind of like Kevin Smith and Tarantino, and then people like Wes Anderson kind of just starting, and or Tim Burton, like a bunch of like kind of weird auteur filmmakers really starting to get their thing. And then the aughts were, now we can kind of really focus on this, and these are going to actually get nominated for Oscars, and they're going to be a little more, you know, kind of shiny. So we had all the movies from this vote, obviously, and like Shaun of the Dead, Punch Drunk Love, Royal Tenenbaums, you know, just a bunch, Juno, obviously, just a bunch of these movies that were just like weird and kind of off the cuff, but were also good enough to be like, this is like a Best Picture nominee, possibly. You know, maybe that's why I like Everything Everywhere All at Once. It feels like it's from a different era, you know?
100%.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, you know, and then there were these weird movies that no one's ever heard of. I've made mention before, but like Danny Deck Chair, Code 46, Formula 51. These, like, there was just so many weird ass movies that were Plunkett and McLean, like these strange movies that came out that like, I found it was like, this is great, right? But nobody ever has heard of again. But then there are a bunch of movies that have really stood the test of time, and people are still talking about them. And then weirdly, speaking of the 90s, I also knew Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Faris because they directed a bunch of Smashing Pumpkins music videos. Yeah.
Yep.
Most famously, I think the Tonight Tonight Smashing Pumpkins video, which is the one that sort of looks like an old, like the, oh God, what was the name of like the very first sci-fi film? It's called like a Trip to the Moon, I think.
Yeah.
It's made to look like that. It's very like kind of like stop motion-y, everything, you know. So, and I think they won like best video that year or whatever. So it was like one of the very few names that I actually, when they came up, I was like, oh, it's those people. I know them. So then when they were directing a movie, it was like, oh, they're making a movie? That's weird. And then of course, Fincher and Spike Jonze and plenty of the people who were doing movie videos around that time ended up doing that. So yeah, just kind of a weird culmination of a lot of those things, but really, really great movie, and really happy to revisit it and sort of celebrate this weird era of filmmaking that I hold dear to my heart.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting, you know, this was, of the 5 movies that we chose for the vote, this was the latest one. And by that, I mean, it was, you know, sort of last in the line of those 5 films. It wasn't the last one ever made, the last quirky indie dramedy ever made.
Yeah.
But it was kind of a high watermark, I think, in some ways, you know. And it's interesting that our patrons picked it over the others. I think that there is, I also think it holds up better. Like you already mentioned, Michael, that Garden State's a little cringy for
Don't
you
do
now.
it. Don't watch it, guys. Stay away.
It was so meaningful senior
It
year
was
of
the
high
best
school.
movie of all time at one point.
But perhaps does not hold up in the same way. Napoleon Dynamite, I think you'd be hard pressed to argue, holds up.
I don't need to see that again.
In
I mean, that
quite
was
the
never
same way.
a good movie. But like, no one was ever like, this movie is excellent. So they're just
Well,
like, it's really fun and weird.
And I think Donnie Darko is an interesting movie. But yeah, I think that there's something that actually, and maybe this is a way that we can either, we can keep talking about this or we can kind of move into the structure of it. I think there actually is something really accessible about this at its heart that the other movies maybe are determined not to have. Or they're just like a little more committed to the quirk than they are to actually being movies that people might connect with. And so I'm not saying that there's nothing like quirky or dysfunctional or off-putting, or like, it does really lean hard into the blend of drama and comedy, and the tone, I think it shifts a little bit here in a way that some people might find bumpy. But ultimately, this was a very successful movie commercially and was very critically acclaimed. So it'd be hard to argue that it's like not accessible, right? It doesn't feel as far out in left field as some of the other movies from this era feel.
I agree with you, Trisha, and I think it feels confident in a way that maybe some of those other movies feel like we're just starting out, or we're experimenting, or we're maybe being showy, you know, Garden State, showing in a way that's like, hey, I'm a filmmaker. This one doesn't feel like it needs to do that so much. It just feels like we're telling this story with these characters in this setting, and we're not going overboard in any which way to like show how auteur-y we are. It's just kind of everything serving the story, which is refreshing and ages well.
Yeah.
Quickly, I think an interesting thing to talk about with that is Steve Carell's performance, because you had a bunch of Adam Sandler, Will Ferrell, Steve Carell, earlier Jim Carrey, like being like, oh, we are known for comic stuff, but we're going to try drama now. And I think some of those performances feel like they're still kind of winking at the camera a little. I feel like Adam Sandler in like Spanglish, maybe, like not Punch Drunk Love, but some of his other movies feels a little like, I don't know if I'm fully buying him as an actor. Will Ferrell and Everything Must Go, like I'm like, I don't know if I'm fully buying, but Steve Carell just like kind of, to me, melts into this character, you know, and it's kind of the exact same thing you're talking about with like the movie itself. I think is that feeling of like, this movie is really, it's really just doing the thing that it's doing rather than kind of trying to, if that makes sense, like really trying to sort of like be like, look at what we're doing. It's just like, no, this is this world, and it feels like fully embraced and fully realized.
Yeah, it feels more organic. Like all of the choices that it's making feel like they are in service of the story and not in service of the trend.
Right. Hope you enjoyed this preview clip. To continue the conversation and listen to the entire episode, head over to the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. The link is in the show notes.